Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and I'm here with the author of a fabulous graphic novel that I literally just finished reading, and it floored me. So could I please ask you to introduce yourself and your book?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening. My name is Jennie Wood, and the book we're discussing today is Paper Planes. It's being published on June 27th by Maverick. And it is a book, it's about two friends who, it's the summer before everything changes. It's the summer before they go to high school, and they're struggling very, very much so to keep a hold of their friendship. And they're sent to a summer camp for troubled youth after an incident. And they just have to navigate that summer camp in order to not be sent away to an alternative high school so they can stay together in high school and somehow find a way to save their friendship.
It's such a beautiful and tender and complex story. And it's all the more bittersweet because it's really easy to empathize with everybody, even as they make choices that, might not seem like the best choices in the moment. But there's just so much lovely stuff going on. To start, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the themes and the plots that you just talked about, being at a camp after a traumatic event, how did that impact the structure and how you approached telling the story in the way that you did?
The first thing that comes to mind is the use of paper planes. Because they're at a camp for troubled youth, it's easy to have the cell phones out of the equation, right? Because it doesn't matter what age you are, cell phones were attached to them, right? I mean, mine's on airplane mode right now, but it's right here. So we wanted to use the paper plane motif as a way for the two main characters, the two friends, Dylan and Leighton, to communicate. And why would they do that if they have their cell phones, right? And it's summer. And so going to a camp for troubled youth, the cell phones are forbidden. They get like an hour a day time on them. And there's flashbacks too, where they're in school, so they're not on their phones, so that they're sending paper planes back and forth. That's how they learn to communicate, since they can't text each other. And so that's the first thing that comes to mind, that, setting it where we set it, plays into this paper planes motif. And it's really how they communicate their most basic primal feelings to each other.
Mm-hmm. It's really, a lovely illustration of, I think, the way that, when you're in those teen years and you're really afraid of connecting with other people, but also like desperately needing to connect with other people, like the way that you navigate that, like that fear and also that the desire, and in terms of like the flashback structure, I really love that too, because it allows like the past and the present to come into like direct dialogue. And it also kind of speaks to like the nature of trauma itself in an interesting way. Like the past keeps kind of intruding on the present story, and was that something that you were thinking about too when you were crafting this?
Absolutely. I memean, I think we're all, something happens through the course of a day and we're triggered into thinking something in our past. And we've all got things like that going on. And when I started working on Paper Planes, it was still fresh in my mind that a grade school friend of mine had passed away. She passed away in the spring of 2020. So not too far into the pandemic. And so we're all isolated at home. And I just went down memory lane. This is not someone who's in my current life, right? But grade school friendships leave their mark on you because they just they play a major role in the people that we become. I think. And she certainly did. And I remember after I found out she died, I went down this huge rabbit hole of childhood pictures and memories. And a friend said to me, reminded me of the mark that grade school friendships leave on us. And I reread Stephen King's The Body and rewatched Stand By Me. And then along comes this project from Maverick about, two grade school friends who are about to go to high school and everything changes. And I'm like, ooh, it speaks to me right now. Right. And as I start working on it, I, was kind of transfixed on just current day things happening that then cause us to remember, cause us to think back, things that stay with you. I use it in this book in a different context, but this friend who passed away. I don't come from a lot of money. I'm very opposite of Leighton in the book. I'm more from Dylan's working class background, but my mother always made a huge deal of my birthday. And for my second grade birthday, and it was really about her, not about me. Right. And for my second, which is very much Leighton's dynamic with her mother, I put that in there. But in the book, Leighton's mother throws a roller rink party. Well, my mother, used money we didn't have to rent out the roller rink and invite my whole second grade class, including my friend who in 2020 passed away. And my friend at the roller rink, I overheard her say, "I don't want to be here." It resonated with me. First off, it hurt. Like that really, really hurt. And that stayed with me to this day. Right. And if I hear someone to this day say they don't want to be somewhere, it brings up that. And so I go right back there. I'm right back in second grade. But also it resonated with me because I didn't want to be at that roller rink party. Even in second grade, I knew we couldn't afford this. It's not what I wanted. To this day, birthdays are problematic for me, and I don't want to party. I want to do what I want. And that stems from that. So I use that in the context of Dylan and Leighton, and it actually becomes a thing that bonds them in a way that didn't happen in my own life. But that's just, one example of something that stays with you, and we can be reminded of it in daily life. Sometimes I'll go to a dinner and, a group dinner, and there's someone there who just doesn't really want to be there, and I can tell, or they say something to me and I'm like, that takes me right back to second grade,
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that moment was so relatable to me too. And it was like, it was depicted so, complexly, and it was so nuanced. And I think what really spoke to me about it was that I felt myself kind of also in Leighton's place where, I also didn't want to be somewhere or not be doing something, and somebody else has the sort of the freedom or the bravery to say it out loud, and you sort of like resent them, but also kind of envy them at the same time,
Yes,
just like being able to say it, and that there's something so interesting with the power dynamic between Leighton and Dylan because of the way that they were raised and also their class differences and their background differences. Can you speak a little bit about how you crafted this dynamic, and how perhaps it informs like what's pushing them together and also pulling them apart, if that makes sense?
Yes. The class dynamic I was very aware of as a kid, and that stayed with me. I mean, even, I grew up in a small town in North Carolina. We were like 2 hours from Asheville, and the rich kids would go skiing. And this has stayed with me to this day. Like, because in New England, it's very normal for people to go skiing. Like people of all different economic places go skiing. But anytime someone mentions skiing to me, I'm just like, that's what rich people do. That's what the rich kids do. And because I was where I was during the pandemic when I got the opportunity to write this book, and I was down the rabbit hole of grade school, class was on my mind. Class is always on my mind. I think inequality, it's all around us. And so if you're going to be aware and going through the day and be present, you can't escape it. And I think as a writer, that is something that I can tackle authentically because I come from very working class roots. And, my mind was on these grade school friendships, in particular, the friend who had passed away, and how in high school we had grown apart. And part of the reason we grew apart, and so many friendships do, is in high school, you become aware of these class differences. Like suddenly, my friends that I had in grade school are all hanging out together because they all live in a certain part of town. Tennis is a big part of Paper Planes, this book. And I was the only person on the girl, because I identified as girl back then. I was the only girl on the tennis team who didn't live in the country club, didn't practice on those tennis courts. I learned to play tennis against an abandoned building. And then, when I got old enough to drive, I would meet a friend at the city park. And so, and I felt very out of place on the tennis team. I would figure out years later that class wasn't the only reason I felt out of place on the tennis team. It was also being non-binary on a team with girls. And so I write about that with Dylan. But I feel like class it's a huge reason friends disappear or dissipate, or you grow apart in high school because suddenly you're doing different things on the weekends. I was working in a movie theater on the weekends in high school while the rich kids were going skiing, and I knew even then that, everyone has problems. And so not to be too jealous or not to hate on people for having money. But, then I got even older and realized, yeah, but their problems are not the same. Like not all problems are equal,
Yeah, that really spoke to me too, honestly. What really kind of broke my heart watching Dylan make their way through the education system was that awareness of knowing that you're the kid that other parents are telling their kids not to spend time with, and for me, I think that's because it was like the early 90s and I was being raised by a single mother, and that was just like not so cool back then. And that feeling, really, you start to internalize it after a while, and so something that this story does so beautifully, I think, is like it really looks at the way that trying to figure out who you are is both helped and hindered by all these external forces like parents and by your social circle and your class background or your all these other factors, and it's really beautifully done. And so I guess that leads me to my question, which is, how do you, when you are depicting people who are so, from the outside looking perceiver, like very flawed and not making great choices all the time, like how do you tread that line between where they are still empathetic, but also still realistic as like, fumbling teens?
Well, I think it's too, it goes hand in hand because to be realistic, we are fumbling, we are imperfect. And with teenagers and preteens, it's just a struggle to communicate, to find the words. And so you capture that by, doing an extra revision and removing some dialogue because you don't want them to be communicating well. And even as adults, we struggle to communicate, right? That never really goes away. We might have more words and more experience, but everything is an effort to communicate. But I think to portray a character realistically is to explore their flaws. We're finally at a place where Dylan is non-binary, Leighton is asexual, where these queer characters don't have to be perfect, right? Shouldn't be perfect because they're human and they're flawed. All characters are flawed. And that's really the only way to realistically portray them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's something so beautiful about their relationship that is so bittersweet and so sad, but also so lovely, that like in the process of figuring out who they are, sometimes being pushed toward each other or pulled apart. And, the hardest lesson, I think, for these characters, and maybe for us as people, is that, you know, a relationship can not work or be unhealthy without there being any bad guys. You know, it's just like sort of about how people grow and how they interact. And, you know, that's sort of like that, I don't know, that dynamic where like relationships shape who you are as a person, and then who you are shapes your relationships. You know, there's something like really very human about that, about like embracing all like the good and the bad as human, you know?
Yes. I think some of my hardest breakups in my life have been with friends who taught me something about myself or helped me grow. And then you become this new person, or you level up to a new person, and then you outgrow the friendship, like you grow apart, right? And you didn't get to that place without that friendship. And I think there's some of that going on with Dylan and Leighton. I think that they help each other figure out who they are, and then they're no longer who they were. You know, and they can't be who they were to each other in grade school.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of interesting differences too in the way that both characters, I guess, respond to their parents' desires for them. You know, like the way that Leighton's relationship with tennis evolves throughout the story is like a really, to me, like it's a really heartbreaking example of that, you know? Like, so she it's something that, again, like her parents are pushing her into very early on. It's something that, you know, something a lot of parents do, I think, which is trying to sort of like vicariously achieve your own goals through your children, you know?
Yes.
um, and, you know, and as she ages, she develops a very different relationship with both the sport and her parents too. And, you know, was that also a factor, do you think, like the different parental dynamics between the two characters? I don't know if I phrased that properly, but
No, it's great. In the past, when I've written parents, I had such a difficult relationship with my parents. So parents can be hard for me to write. I would vilify them or make them too far out of the picture. I mean, a teenager doesn't want to hear their parents. They want to block them out so that I could make that work. But I really wanted, especially, I wanted the parents to be more sympathetic, especially with Dylan's mom working multiple jobs to support her kids, being a single mom. There were times I had to go back and do more revision so that she was sympathetic. And also the camp counselors, I didn't want them to be stock one-dimensional characters. I wanted them to have some dimension too, and kind of be parental figures, or, in the case of, I think, Erwin, who's a younger counselor, maybe a, uncle or older brother figure to the campers, to Dylan and Leighton. Leighton's parents are more complicated. She has a more complicated relationship with them. She doesn't hate tennis, but she resents that, her mother's pushing her toward it. And you totally nailed it in that, Leighton's mother wants to live kind of vicariously through Leighton. And I had some of that with my own mother, who her dream was to be a concert pianist. And she had me playing piano from the time I was 5. And I would sit when I would get really annoyed with her, I would play Scott Joplin's The Entertainer just over and over and over until she would tell me to stop, go to my room. That's how I got out of it. Leighton, I wanted it to be more nuanced, right? So she doesn't hate tennis. She wants to please her parents, and she's good at it. And when you're good at something, you can have a love-hate relationship. It's all these actors or musicians who like hate touring, or actors who hate playing characters or losing themselves in a character. Why do they keep doing it? Part of it is they're good at it, right? So I wanted all of those nuances in Leighton's relationship with her parents. So I worked really hard on that element of it.
Yeah, and what you just said really made me think about something in relation to Leighton and tennis that plays into the parental dynamic, is that just the sort of the doubt that saturates that age, because like even if she was enjoying the tennis and doing well at it and excelling in that age where part of your job at that age is to sort of differentiate from your parents and separate a little bit, so you're naturally going to question, like, is this me or is this them, and so that is like a an identity crisis, really.
Yes. And it still plays out. I mean, there's the story after story of professional tennis players who are coached by their parents, and there's that kind of love hate or push pull, and you can see it. You can even see it during a match, and just body language and communicating, because coaches can now coach professionally during a match, the players. So yeah, this is a dynamic that it has always been there. And so Leighton is really starting to feel that. And part of this story is she and Dylan coming into their own and finding their identities. And yeah, what is her identity separate from her parents? What is her identity separate from her best friend?
Yeah, and the fact that this is all happening at this summer camp for troubled youth, which is a dynamic that I would love to get into too, kind of heightens the stakes in a real way, because they also have to achieve this goal of, making it through the program without incidents, that they can sort of go back to their status quo as much as possible. And something that I really thought about with the camp and its structure, was like sort of how it operates as a critique of our responses to trauma, like as a society, because it's about punishment. It's not about like healing or recovery or rehab or anything. Like it is about punishing people who step out of line. And like, were you intending to comment sort of on how we as societies like respond to trauma and try to fix it?
Sure. It's why a lot of the camp activities it's not about healing, right? It's not about recovery. It's, they're going hiking, they're doing trust falls. It's very much a camp that any teen would go to. So they're not really addressing the issues other than they have evaluations. And there's, some kind of journaling exercises, self-reflection exercises. But again, that is something that you could find at any camp. So, we did want to, kind of show that this is how society deals with it. Definitely.
Yeah. It's, it is sort of, it puts the characters in a really tough spot in a way, because like they're trying to work these things out on their own, and they are being given this timeline by having to make it through this program. And the way that they're being treated is sort of like actually exacerbating the problem. They're like, when they are triggered or when they have sort of traumatic reactions to things that happen to them, that's taken as what's the word I'm looking for? Like an infraction, like a disrespect of authority or something like that. And it really is just kind of looking at the behavior with the wrong framework.
Right. And I think that the counselors at this camp, and even, parents to a certain degree, don't have the tools to help the kids, right? They don't know how to handle it. This is how it's always been done. This is how these counselors this is how this camp has, always been organized. So, any type of depression or mental health or acting out, they don't know how to handle it. Like they're supposed to go fishing. The kids go, they take the kids fishing, and what you catch is your dinner, and you don't catch a fish, or you throw the fish back, you don't have dinner. And the kids are reacting to this kind of very dated way of doing things. And yeah, so I think it's our way of showing a broken system for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the fishing scene. That was one of my favorite scenes in the book. And I have to say that I love Cricket. Such a great character. Were the other campers, what I think is really interesting is that, Dylan and Leighton are working on their own relationship, trying to figure out who they are as individuals and who they are together. And they're also sort of like figuring out relationships with the other people around them, and that push play that push pull, I keep saying that, between wanting to connect with these other people, but then also being jealous of the other person connecting. Like there's just so much like really human, messy feeling there. And it's allowed to be messy. And that's really, really lovely.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's the way it is. Maybe less so in adulthood, but in junior high and high school, it is messy, and you're almost afraid to connect with someone new because you're afraid to lose what you have. You're certainly afraid of your BFF making other friendships. Where to varying degrees, some people are more insecure than others, but there's that feeling of being threatened and like losing that intimacy and losing that like best friendship, right? Mm-hmm. So that's definitely there. Cricket was not in the original plan for the book. And the editors at Maverick came back and said, it's too heavy. We need a character for levity to lighten it up. And so Cricket was a late addition. Like everything had been mapped out, and I was happy to do it. And I think when you don't map something out, the freedom comes, and you're creating something just for fun. I think it comes through in the character. And I want to mention that the artist on this book is Dozer, and they did a phenomenal job with the art and creating these characters, a diverse group of characters, and a great job with all the characters, and just made Cricket come alive on the page.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Dozer's art is incredible. And I'm really actually jealous, frankly, of artists like Dozer who can make characters really distinct with very simple or minimalist gestures, like every character is so different and so memorable and so unique. And it's such just a beautiful, absolutely beautiful, minimalist is even maybe like underselling the art style, but like, it's just like it's like a kind of simplicity that is like boiling down a lot of complexity, actually,
Yes, it feels effortless. When I look at their art, it just feels so effortless. And we want to represent a wide range of people. We want people to be able to see themselves in this book. And Dozier was able to do that in a way where it doesn't feel forced, and it feels just very natural, and the characters feel accessible, and they look like people that you see every day, and that's just a really nice thing.
Yeah, it is. Well, thank you so much for coming to talk to us. It was absolutely lovely to have you here. Is there anything else you're working on that you can talk about, or I know a lot of times people can't talk about these things yet, but what's on the horizon?
I know. I hate that. I do have something in the works for Maverick, another book, following up. It's separate. It's not a sequel or anything to Paper Planes, but everything about working with Maverick and then their parent company, Mad Cave, everyone there has been so wonderful. So I'm happy that I get to continue that relationship. We're just getting started on that. So that'll be a while before that comes out, but it's another book geared at young adults, at that whole genre. So excited about that.
Oh, great. Well, I hope you'll consider coming back maybe to talk about that one when it's ready.
I would love to. Thanks so much for having me, Jen. It's been great talking to you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you. Okay, listeners, please pick up Paper Planes. By the time that you hear this, it will be available at your favorite library or bookstore or comic book store, I imagine, too. So check out any of these places. Thank you so much for listening. And it is time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.